Since the dawn of civilization, the Egyptians have embarked on a journey to the afterlife, preparing their tombs with meticulous care to ensure a safe passage to eternity. But behind the magnificence of their works lies a dark warning.
Whoever dares to disturb the eternal sleep of the Pharaoh risks encountering the wrath of the gods and the curse of those who watch over his tomb.
Stories of mysterious premature deaths, relentless misfortune, and inexplicable events have surrounded the discoveries of brave archaeologists who dared to challenge the ancient prophecies. From the legends of Tutankhamun to the tomb of Ramses the Great, the curse has manifested in terrible and unexpected ways, defying human rationality and leaving behind an aura of terror and superstition. But what lies behind this ancient curse? Is it just a matter of coincidence, or is there something more sinister? A very recent study just published by researcher Pharaohs investigates the origins of this terrible legend, and with the support of concrete data and facts, it points to a new line of research that opens up incredible possibilities, capable of challenging everything we thought we knew about this ancient and mysterious people. But before delving into this very interesting study, we invite you, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the channel to support our work, and don't miss our new videos. In 1922, after years of research, the British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, the pharaoh who lived during the 18th dynasty and died at the age of just 19. Tutankhamun's reign was actually very brief. His life was cut short at a young age by a mysterious illness, but he became one of the most famous pharaohs of ancient Egypt thanks to the discovery of his tomb, which remained intact for millennia. But that's not all. A terrible legend claims that everyone who was involved with this extraordinary discovery was struck by a curse that led them to an early death. And this promptly happened a few weeks after the discovery, when Lord Carnarvon, the sponsor of Carter's research, died from an unspecified illness that showed symptoms of blood poisoning and pneumonia. But this was only the first in a series of mysterious deaths that struck researchers, tomb raiders, and ordinary workers who had worked at the archaeological site. So is there a connection between these enigmatic deaths and the curse that the ancient Egyptians prophesied would befall anyone who violated these sacred places? According to the researcher Pharaohs, yes, and the cause would be attributed to radiation poisoning, which affected everyone who participated in the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. But not only that tomb. Many men and women would in fact pay with their lives for their thirst for knowledge. Carter himself, for example, a few years after the discovery, would die from a very aggressive lymphoma. Clearly, Pharaohs' theory is undoubtedly extraordinary, but as we will see later, it is not the result of mere speculation, but is supported by concrete facts and data, which we are sure will capture your attention and will not leave you indifferent.
Those who break into this tomb will meet death from an illness that no doctor can diagnose.
A study conducted between 1999 and 2005 showed how the incidence of hematopoietic tumors, that is, those whose primary causes include exposure to radiation, is higher in Egypt than in any other country with the same environmental conditions. This incidence has been vaguely attributed to factors related to modern lifestyle, such as diet and industrial pollutants. However, this view has been firmly refuted by evidence from ancient Egypt. Forensic studies actually confirm an unexpectedly high incidence of hematopoietic tumors, even in ancient Egypt. Analyses of skeletons from various places and periods have revealed examples of multiple osteolytic lesions, from myeloma, degenerative joint diseases, cranial porosity, and nasopharyngeal carcinoma at much higher rates compared to modern populations. This, according to the opinion of several researchers, strongly refutes the idea that this kind of tumors can be considered superior. The study analyzed the causes of death of about 500 Egyptologists who worked at archaeological sites during a period between the 1800s and the 2000s. From the analysis of this data, many early and sudden deaths emerge, and among these we also find several high-profile victims. In addition to the already mentioned Carter and Carnarvon, we find Jean-François Champollion, famous for his translations. His name is Jean-François Champollion.
All'interno delle piramidi di Saqqara, sino a quando nel 1932 morì all'età di 41 anni per esaurimento e apoplessia, insieme a 5 suoi compagni.
Auguste Mariette, a pioneer of the excavations at Saqqara, suffered from various illnesses and almost complete blindness before
Passare per un'emorragia violenta e morire a 59 anni. L'eminentissimo egittologo britannico Walter Bryan Emery trascorse molti anni scavando in cerca di reperti, fino a quando non collassò dentro una tomba a Saqqara
and died within a few hours. The American archaeologist George Reisner spent years excavating the Mastabas of Giza, until at the age of 75 he collapsed inside the Great Pyramid and died of suspected poisoning. But among the suspicious deaths, we also find that of one of the most famous historical figures in human history, Napoleon Bonaparte. It is probably just speculation or simply a historical curiosity. But Napoleon Bonaparte had actually led a military and scientific expedition to Egypt, during which he explored its ancient ruins. And, according to some accounts, he even spent the night inside the Great Pyramid. Napoleon would die at just 51 years old after suffering for months from nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and blood clots, which the post-mortem autopsy would attribute to stomach cancer. Let's repeat once again that this could just be speculation. But the data examined in this study show that out of 500 cases analyzed of researchers who had actively worked at some ancient Egyptian sites, as many as 119 would die from sudden and not entirely explained illnesses. To this, we must add that the exact cause of death, especially in the oldest cases, was often not reported at all or was linked to generic symptoms described by the patient rather than to a precise forensic examination. Furthermore, we should add that certain types of tumors were not known in ancient times. Leukemia, for example, was only defined in the mid-1800s and lymphoma only at the end of the 19th century. So what do these data show? Were the researchers who contributed to the discoveries in ancient Egypt victims of some unspecified radiation poisoning? Or are these just simple coincidences? To better understand the issue raised by Pharaohs, we need to take a step back and analyze some specific peculiarities of the ancient
civiltà egizia.
In ancient Egypt, death was not simply an end, but a passage to another existence, a divine realm where the pharaoh, like Osiris, the sun god, joined the gods. The mastaba, the monumental tomb in the shape of a truncated pyramid, was the sacred place where this miraculous event took place. According to legend, Osiris, after being killed by his brother Seth, was resurrected thanks to the intervention of his wife Isis and his son Horus. His body was prepared with magical rituals and placed inside a stone chest. Transformed into incandescent light, Osiris ascended to the sky, reuniting with his father Ra. This is a religious and humanized interpretation of a very ancient rite, which essentially reinterprets something that perhaps the ancient Egyptians could not fully understand. The body of Osiris, in fact, during the preparation for the rite, was fed with supposed cakes and beer. Afterwards, it was placed inside a stone chamber where it magically transformed into incandescent light and ascended to the sky to join the Father God. The earliest Egyptians of the Old Kingdom believed that this process was literally and physically real, carried out through alchemy or magic, and that it could not be understood by the common man. After the interruption of the First Intermediate Period, common Egyptians inherited the funerary literature of the Old Kingdom, which was said to contain great secrets. In fact, the ancient texts warned against revealing their mysteries.
Do not show it to anyone else. It is a true mystery that no man knows anywhere.
The Book of the Dead also made a distinction between the previous kings of the Old Kingdom and ordinary humanity, which was characterized as common people. The means that allowed this transformation and to ascend to the sky was the invisible emanation contained in the magical offerings. Osiris, for example, declares in the coffin text,
I have power through offerings. I proceed by means of the emanation, by means of magic. Take the emanation, so you will not be inert. Proceed from the burning fire. I have eaten the magic of the spirits of magical food. The souls are within me. The shadows are within me. I am transformed into powerful spirits. I shine in the sun from the emanation. I am the Ancient One. My soul possesses the power in its primordial form.
In Egyptian funerary texts, these offerings were called kefa, a magical food that plays a crucial role in the pharaoh's resurrection process. Described as cakes and beer or bread and milk, this food was not just a ritual offering, but a key element for the transformation of the sovereign's body. Among the magical foods, saffron cakes had a special importance. Symbolizing the eye of Horus, the god of the sky, these cakes were offered to Osiris to nourish his soul and to prepare it for his journey toward eternity. In the coffin text, a series of spells describes in detail the preparation and consumption of this magical food. The emanation, an energetic substance coming from the food, was associated with the movement of the sun and was administered in specific portions. But what was this magical food that had the potential to make the pharaoh's soul transcend all the way to the heights of the sky? Surprisingly, some researchers have found a curious food described in Egyptian texts and considered magical food and the processes of modern nuclear technology. Yellow cake, the raw mineral of uranium-235, the main nuclear fuel, actually has characteristics similar to the magical food described in ancient texts. However, raw yellow cake is not enough to cause a nuclear reaction and must be enriched to a higher concentration. This process causes the substance to take on the form of a chilled milky liquid. This milky appearance seems to be cryptically described in the coffin texts, where the process appears to refer to the purification of magical food and its preparation for consumption by Osiris.
Osiris received the milky fluid from the breast of Isis. He received the emanation from the cold drink, the emanation of decay. The cold drink is yours, the emanation is yours, the powers are in it.
The body of the pharaoh, therefore, nourished with these specific elements, would then trigger a reaction that would produce a violent light and extreme heat. The physical evidence found inside the Great Pyramid surprisingly seems to support this incredible theory. The inner walls of the king's chamber were initially reported as polished marble because they reflected the light of the explorers' torches, but it was later understood that it was vitrified granite caused by an extreme heat source. The stone sarcophagus is made of ordinary gray granite, but its surface has an unnatural dark brown color, as if it had been baked by intense heat, and the edges show signs of melting. This heat, according to some scholars, could have been generated by a nuclear reaction, triggered by Kefa. This technology, based on uranium, would also have produced radioactive waste products that would have been managed through burial, and there is textual and physical evidence of this practice. In the Egyptian legend, for example, it is said that after the death of Osiris, the pieces of his body were placed in a lead-lined coffin and buried deep underwater. This description is consistent with the structure of the so-called Tomb of Osiris at Giza, which consists of a 30-meter deep vertical shaft filled with water, at the bottom of which there was a dacite sarcophagus weighing about 40 tons. The basalt boxes on the second level, about 20 meters deep, were examined with a Geiger counter, and they were found to be intensely radioactive, especially on the inside. Also in Giza, specifically in the warehouses, in the basement, in the Valley of Chephren, and on the second level of the well of the Tomb of Osiris, which we just talked about, unusually high levels of radiation were detected, while in several underground tombs in Saqqara, radon was detected instead, which is a radioactive gas released during the decay phases of uranium. These radioactive levels, which are considered higher than the normal radioactivity present in the ground, suggest that these sites could actually have been places designated for the storage of radioactive waste. and they definitely call for further analysis. This theory also seems to be confirmed by ancient texts found in Egypt, where it is clearly stated that the body of Osiris, or rather what was left of it, was to be considered waste material, and humanity is warned to stay away from these remains as harmful spirits would be present. But Pharaohs' study does not stop here. It goes in search of further evidence and analyzes the Mastabas, the monumental tombs used during the early phases of Egyptian civilization. The mastaba tombs of ancient Egypt are an intricate enigma and apparently contain nothing we'd expect to find in a burial. No mummies, no skeletons, no elaborate funerary goods. At first, they were just simple holes in the ground. Then, as time went by, they turned into real monuments, raised rectangular structures with 2 inner rooms and a deep shaft leading to an underground burial chamber. But the strangest thing is that these mastabas were all the same. It didn't matter how important the deceased was. His tomb always had exactly the same appearance, and there weren't even any decorations, at least at the beginning. Just simple stones bare of any ornament. Archaeologists have found all sorts of things in the mastabas: statues, everyday objects, even votive offerings, but not a trace of a mummy, a skeleton, or a bone. So, where did the bodies go? The very etymology of the term mastaba could, however, give us another clue. In Arabic, the term mastaba means bench or table. This association comes from the first European archaeologists, who relied on the names used by the local workers. However, the shape and function of these structures do not resemble a bench at all, and this led researchers to further investigate, revealing that mastaba would actually derive from the ancient Persian bank, which means bunker or vault. A term that definitely fits these structures better, as they are characterized by underground spaces and hidden chambers. Furthermore, bank does not refer to a bench in the sense of a seat, but rather to a safe place to store something valuable or dangerous. The primary and original function of Egyptian mastabas was to store large quantities of offerings in ceramic containers for a very long period of time. Over time, the belief developed that these offerings, such as beer or wine, were intended for religious rituals to appease the gods or assist people in the afterlife. However, this interpretation was influenced by later religious practices and by Egyptologists from the Euro-Christian period, who misinterpreted depictions of processions as funeral ceremonies. In reality, the original offerings were not drinks and were not presented ceremonially on an altar, but were simply stored in underground chambers. A notable example, for instance, is the mastaba that stood at Saqqara and was expanded into a much larger, multi-layered structure, which we now know as the Pyramid of Djoser. During the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, thousands of vessels were moved from Abydos to Saqqara into a new storage area located beneath the step pyramid. This move was not a ceremonial act, but rather a large-scale operation known as replenishment. In short, it was as if the site of Abydos, where these mysterious vessels were once kept, had been replaced. This led to the relocation of about 40,000 vessels, which were placed in deep tunnels dug beneath the Pyramid of Djoser. This operation is described in the Famine Stela, which recounts how Pharaoh Djoser saved the country from a terrible famine worsened by a plague that was driving the people to their deaths. But what caused this plague? Is there a connection with the site of Abydos, where the mysterious vessels were kept? Djoser's vessels also hold another mystery. We talked about it in a previous video that you can find here on the channel. But briefly, we can say that, among other peculiarities, these vessels appear as mysterious objects because they are made from a very hard stone, which would have been impossible to work with the technology available to the ancient Egyptians at that time. In the previous video, we pointed out how unusual it was that the ancient Egyptians used such a complex material to make these simple vessels, whose apparent purpose was to store food and provisions. However, the study we are analyzing might provide us with a more realistic answer. In fact, the vessels did not contain food, but it is much more likely that they contained some sort of mud or mortar. Was this kind of mud perhaps the radioactive waste caused by the use of uranium during the rites of ascension to the sky? Was it the presence of this radioactive mud that escaped from the site of Abydos that caused the mysterious epidemic during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser? And finally, was this the real reason why these jars were made from a hard material like diorite that would have been impossible to work? To answer these questions, Pharaohs' research invites us to reconsider the interpretation of some ancient symbols found on the labels of the Abydos jars. But before we look at this symbolism together, we need to make a preliminary point. Modern physics distinguishes between two types of radiation: alpha and beta particles, and gamma rays. Alpha particles are relatively large, slow, and not very penetrating. Beta particles are very small, highly active, and moderately penetrating. Gamma rays, on the other hand, travel only in straight lines, are highly penetrating, and very harmful to bone marrow, and their exposure causes cancers of the blood-forming tissues. The ancient Egyptian system had two types of soul or spirit that emerged from the remains of the dead body of Osiris: the Ba and the Ka. The Ba was initially represented as the abstract symbol of a bird. The labels on the jars from Abydos distinguish two types of birds, which curiously resemble the modern designation of alpha and beta particle radiation. Following this logic, we can say that alpha radiation was represented as a large and slow goose. Beta radiation, on the other hand, was represented as a small and agile bird, often illustrated as escaping up the vertical shaft of the mastaba. The Ka, which we can associate with gamma rays and was considered much more powerful and dangerous, was initially represented as the head of a snake, and later as raised human arms and hands. As we know, radioactive waste is very dangerous also because it lasts a long time, like technetium, which has a decay time of 211,000 years. It's again curious to note how the drawings on Egyptian mastabas show large numbers of specific birds, for example 111,000 doves, 11,100 generic birds, or 120,000 ducks or geese. Do these large numbers suggest the existence of a code indicating the expected lifespan of all the waste stored in the mastaba's shafts? Another interesting fact is that in the mastaba, the burial chamber was offset from the shaft, as if to limit the escape of gamma rays, which, as we've seen, only travel in a straight line. The murals of the mastaba also showed some smaller BA birds escaping up the vertical shaft. In the raised covering, the inner chamber was positioned directly above the underground burial chamber. This was the shortest distance to detect possible gamma ray leaks. This chamber contained a Ka symbol, indicating that it was for the Ka. The chamber was also ventilated by small holes placed at the top and was used to hold live birds that acted as the canaries of the mastabas.
Per rilevare possibili perdite di Ka.
Numerous texts refer to the continuous delivery of live birds to the mastaba, probably the sacred ibis. The historian Josephus Flavius, for example, recorded that the ancient Egyptians used caged ibises to detect evil snakes. Birds, as we know, are known to be extremely sensitive to radiation. Following all these clues, we can hypothesize that the mastaba was designed to safely store and manage radioactive waste for millions of years. Its structure and functioning, in fact, appear to be the result of a deep knowledge of radioactivity and its dangers. The deep burial chamber was actually dug 30 meters deep into the rock to create a physical barrier against the escape of radiation, especially gamma rays. The radioactive waste was contained in very hard and dense stone vessels, similar to sarcophagi, most likely to prevent the escape of penetrating radiation. The second outer chamber contained a sort of shelf used to present food offerings. This was a second ingenious strategy to detect the presence of sterilizing gamma radiation. If in fact the food placed on the shelf did not decompose normally, it was a clear sign of dangerous radiation. The tombs of the first and second dynasty at Abydos appear simpler. They are often just shallow pits with little or no covering. As various pieces of evidence seem to suggest, it was precisely this lack of protection that led to radioactive leaks. To confirm all this, several Egyptian texts mention Abydos as a refining site. It is about detecting the way radioactive materials are handled. The History of Egypt by Manetho instead describes a severe plague during the reign of Dije, which could have been caused precisely by exposure to radiation. In Abydos, moreover, hundreds of secondary tombs have been found, containing young people aged 20 to 25, who appeared to be in good health and who may have died from radiation poisoning. Finally, studies conducted on skeletons from the Old Kingdom have shown a significant incidence of degenerative joint disorders and cranial porosity, conditions that can be caused by exposure to radiation, as well as by famine or plague. We started from the curse of Tutankhamun's tomb, and after a journey through time and the most mysterious places of ancient Egypt, we can say that behind what some authors have romantically called the curse of Tutankhamun, there seems to be something much more disturbing and mysterious hidden, and it undoubtedly raises countless questions. Pharaohs' research is very intriguing. Anyone who wants to learn more can find the direct link to his work in the video description, and it undoubtedly raises a series of questions that are not easy to answer unless we start questioning everything we thought we knew about the history of ancient Egypt. But now, at this point, we are really curious to know your opinion. Write in the comments what you think, and if you like the video and want to support our work, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.